Hello, writers, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Today's live episode, Ask Me Almost Anything, starting with the question, why did you stop screenwriting? My name is Glenn Gers, and I am the Chief Operating Everything here at Helicopter. Writing for Screens. I am the Chief Operating Everything, and I created this channel in order to take the skills, tools, insights that I had to figure out for myself in a long career, 25-year career writing for TV and movies. On my way out of the business, I have tried to leave behind what I had to learn. In case it is useful for you, I tried to put it into small lessons that were on a certain topic. There's no big system. There's no big rules. I do not believe there is a formula or a right way or a wrong way to do this. I just think you got to try a whole lot of different things and figure out what works for you. So to give you a whole bunch of things to think about here on my channel, this is a page capture of my channel. And if you look closer towards the bottom, you will see 3 playlists: Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills and Craft, and The Process, Being a Writer. Okay, these 3 playlists all together have about 50 10-minute videos on them. Each one has a big, bold thumbnail that tells you what it's about. Genre, flashbacks, character, dialogue, thinking in scenes, process of questions. Whatever it is, it's the title, it's the thumbnail, it's a little lesson on that topic and how it might relate to you. That's what it is. These 50 lessons, if you watch all of them, really tell you everything I can think of for you to figure out what works for you, what's good for you, what you want to do, how things work. That's all I can do. Then it's on you. You got to figure out what works for you to do what you want to do in the way that can be done, because that's constantly changing and it's different for everybody. So all I can do is give you those things. I then took those lessons and I have put them into a book. Yes, there is a brand new paperback or ebook of all of my collected teachings. There's a video link down in the description here. It's a little 1-minute video to tease it, and it gives you links to where you can get the book if you want to. So that's what's going on there. And ever since then, I have just been doing live streams every week, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time Zone, on a different topic, and as a chance to give you guys some space to talk, to ask some questions, stuff like that. So I'm going to say some hellos and then get into the first question, which was asked by email during the week. First of all, hi, Fung. Hi, Thomas Lewis. Hello, Miller Turner. Just finished watching Kill Bill the first time, and I don't understand what the film is trying to say. It just seems like a blood fest. All right, well, we'll get into that. That seems like a fair thing to discuss. Hi, Violet Wolf. Thank you for buying the book. I'm so excited to have people in it. What do you think about David Bordwell? I will have to look up who is David Bordwell. My first thought is, I don't know who David Bordwell is. Good evening, Steed. Okay, now I'm going to get to the first question and get things started while you guys are showing up. Thank you, Jeff. Hello. I appreciate it. Yes, the portable form. That is exactly what it is. If you don't want to watch a video, it's funny. I started teaching thinking video. It's a new way to teach, a new way to reach people, different, the new thing. But a lot of people kept saying, can I have this as a book? So I did. But anyway, let me get to the question, because Blanche C. asked this question. She said, screenwriting has been your passion since you were a teen, which is true. At what point did you feel you could stop writing scripts, and why? Would love to know your path of writing. That's a good question to talk about. Just remembering that everyone is going to be different. Everyone writes for different reasons, and everyone is going to have different reasons to stop or start or take it on or not. But this is mine, and maybe it's useful. The first reason is, honestly, and I've tried to express this, screenwriting is frustrating. There is an incredible pride in getting this particular very weird art form, to getting good at it. And the rewards are really amazing when you do get good at it. But the truth is, while I became very good at screenwriting, I never became very good at being a screenwriter. And I will try and talk about what I mean by that. But the main thing is, you have to understand, I started screenwriting because I thought it would be a good way to make a career for myself that could pay for all of my creative interests. When I was growing up, when I was a teenager, I wanted to make films. I wanted to write plays. I wanted to do radio plays. I wanted to draw and paint. I had so many different creative things. And I was like, well, you can't make a living at all those. And the thing was, when I got out of college in 1982, the world was just starting to get into this concept of screenwriting as a hot career. And so spec scripts, which are original scripts that a writer just writes, were for the first time big sales. People were starting to go like, oh my God, we're going to pay $1 million for a script. So screenwriting was the best way as a writer I could make a living to pay for doing theater or being a painter or all these other things. So I started screenwriting, and it took me 12 years to even get any money at all from screenwriting. But once it started coming in, it came in for 25 years. But the thing is, I never thought of myself as a screenwriter. I always thought of myself as a filmmaker. I was screenwriting with the intention of being a writer-director. That was my goal. Always. And it's funny, this past couple of weeks, there's been a lot of my past coming back at me in the form of in the form of documentaries and docudramas. There's the Springsteen docudrama, because he was very influential when I was a young person. But especially, there's a 5-part documentary by Rebecca Miller called Mr. Scorsese, which tracks Scorsese's phenomenal filmmaking career. And I watched that. And then that same week, Rick Rubin, who's an amazing music producer. By the way, if you haven't heard Rick Rubin's recordings with Johnny Cash called the American Recordings, there's, I think, 4 albums called American Recordings 2, blah, blah, blah. And then one box set called Unearthed. They are phenomenal. Phenomenal. Anyway, the point is, Rick Rubin has a podcast, and he interviewed Francis Ford Coppola about his filmmaking. And then just like the very next episode of the Rick Rubin podcast was with Woody Allen. So I heard Scorsese, Coppola, Woody Allen all talking about being a filmmaker. And the thing that was interesting was Scorsese and Coppola, they wanted to be filmmakers. They were in it to make films, to be directors, to be creators of this art. Woody Allen was a writer who said, I will direct to protect my script. And you can see it. I think that a lot of Woody Allen's films are excellent, especially the early ones. And certainly there is the problem of Woody Allen's person compared to his work. But separating that out, simply talking about the idea of there are some people who direct because they love film. And that was me. I loved the language of film. I wanted to learn the language of film. It is immensely, immensely demanding and complicated to learn filmmaking. So honestly, my entire career, I never thought of myself as a screenwriter. I thought of myself as great at screenwriting, and certainly that was a great way to get into the business. But the point for me was always to use screenwriting to open up the door to become a filmmaker. And that didn't happen because the truth is, first of all, most screenwriters are terrible directors. And second of all, most screenwriters don't know how to direct. So no one is going to take a chance on a first-time director who has no films to show. This happens very, very rarely. You'll get someone like Alex Garland or something who has built up such a power base and been on sets enough that they can switch over. And I don't know if he made shorts or anything, but the thing is, I was not able to get people to support me as a director, even though I was working in Hollywood as a screenwriter. First of all, I never had a really big hit. If I had a huge hit, that could have changed things maybe. But also, I just did not understand the job. The job of screenwriting is to support the filmmaker, usually the director. I didn't get that. I always thought I thought it was about the script. I thought it was about me, and I wasn't good at this. Even though I could provide good material, I wasn't good to work with. I wasn't thinking, how can I have fun supporting this person? I was always like, when is my turn? And that's not what anybody wants to hear. And it was lovely that some of them were supportive. The director of Fracture, Greg Hoblet, was very supportive of me. Callie Corey, the director of Mad Money, was supportive. But the main thing is, I spent most of my Hollywood career doing things thinking, I'm going to use this opportunity to make a film that I want to make. It was never, I want to do a good job doing this film. And I wanted to do a good job, but the point was to get that break. It took my entire career to get that break. Several times during my career, if I had made a bunch of money, I would stop working as a screenwriter to make a little indie DIY film that I would essentially pay for myself. This always took longer than I intended, usually like 2 years. I was like, oh, I'll make a little film. 2 years that I was not really writing while I was learning to make these films. And I'm really proud of the one that, especially of Disfigured, that I did make with the money I made from Fracture and Mad Money. But right when Disfigured came out was 2007, 2008, which is, in case you don't remember, an enormous financial crisis which we are still reckoning with, and a Writers Guild strike which completely changed the business, cut it down drastically. So I had banked jobs during the strike so that, in other words, I got some jobs right before the strike started. They were put on hold, and when the strike was over, the jobs came back to life, and I had work for a couple of years. But after that, things slowed down because things slowed down for everyone. The number of screenwriting jobs cut down drastically in the early 2010s. And I was scrambling to pay the bills. And I took whatever I could, in whatever way I could, and I managed. We got by. But then, just when things were truly, truly at their lowest point for me, where it was like, well, lowest point in my Hollywood life, my good friend Howard Gould got to run a show. He was running a sitcom called Instant Mom, which started on Nickelodeon, went on several networks. But the point is, for almost 4 years, he hired me to work on Instant Mom. And I suddenly had a job, an ongoing job that lasted for years and paid the bills. And he only hired me 2 days a week. So I was only working on these shows mostly 2 days a week, but it was paying my bills. So I said, this is my opportunity. I am going to write a script to direct. This is going to be I had an idea. It's called Fail. I've put it up on, there's another behind the script. It's called Fail, a Love Story. The script is there, explanation, link to the script is there. Anyway, I wrote that script. I was like, this is going to be the script that I bet it all on. I'm going to get this script made. Now, at the same time, I had this other idea for Like, Share, Follow, which was a thriller. I didn't like it as much as Fail, but I knew it was really, really commercial. Now, I've known things were really, really commercial before and they didn't work out. But in this case, what had happened was I had been screenwriting partly because I had put up with screenwriting, partly because it paid the bills, like amazingly, like better than anything else. But now it wasn't paying the bills. And the question was, if it's not going to pay the bills, why do it? For a long time, my challenge was, can I do it better? Can I get my dialogue to be sharper? Can I get my action scenes to be more practical or more exciting? Can I work within a small budget or a big budget? Like each time I did a script, there was a particular challenge, a different kind of genre, a different kind of challenge, but it was always like something I could do to make my work more likely to get made or more satisfying to me creatively. So there was a reason I was doing the script beyond whether or not someone else liked it. There was like, can I make this more readable? Can I make it shorter? Can I make my first act shorter? I always had a problem with really long first acts. So for a couple of scripts, my only real goal was, can I get the acts to be in the right the proportion? Okay, so that's the sort of thing that was keeping me going, and mainly they were paying me. They were paying me, so I would say, okay, what can I do with this werewolf thriller? What can I do with this coming of age story? Whatever it was, I was like, I'm down to try and make the best version I can of this. And I was learning about how to do it, but I learned very slowly. I'm very, very stubborn and self-centered. And I think the whole point is for me to do what I want. That's not the point of screenwriting. So I got down to where I thought, I don't personally feel I need to write any more scripts. In terms of my screenwriting skills, I had written about 30 scripts, 30 or 40 scripts. I had written a lot of scripts over decades. I was, as far as I was concerned, good enough. I had gotten to the point where there was nothing else where I was like, oh, I wish I could make my structure stronger. I wish I could make my dialogues punchier. Whatever it was, I thought I was good. So I wrote those 2 scripts with the idea that I was going to get a break to direct. And I did. Like, Share, Follow, sold to Blumhouse for me to direct, ultra low budget. And that happened to coincide exactly with the end of Instant Mom. So around 2013, I went from my last big screenwriting work to my first professional directing. I had directed several movies before, but always things that I had raised the money for myself. They were little DIY movies. This was an actual in the business movie. So that took way longer than I thought it would. Partly because I didn't know what I was doing as a director. I knew how to direct, and I actually did pretty good on the directing. The editing was really, really hard, and the work with Blumhouse on the editing was really, really hard, and it took a long time. So by the time all of that finished, the goal was get me more directing work. But right around then, work was drying up. There was less and less work, especially, for people who had been around for a while. And I managed to keep going. Blumhouse hired me a couple more times. So I got to 2019 writing scripts, but I was writing them because they were a cool way, hopefully, to get to direct, and a good way to pay the bills. 2019, I was having a hard time finding more work, and I went to the Austin Film Festival, and I was really inspired about teaching. It was the first time in a long time that I had sat down and talked to people about writing, and I felt like things were coming together for me as a teacher. And I thought, you know what? If my writing work is slowing down, I was 2 years away from being able to take the pension that my union work had built up for me. So if I could just get through 2 years of finding some way to pay the bills, I could start to have pension payments that would pay the bills. So I started teaching, hoping that I would be able to teach and make money at teaching. Never did. Partly because I didn't want to monetize this. I wanted to say, for the people who can afford to pay me privately, I would do private lessons. I found that private lessons were very difficult, very unsatisfying, very time consuming. And as soon as the pension kicked in, I stopped doing them. So that is the story of how I ended up here. The short answer, Blanche, is screenwriting was a series of challenges towards filmmaking. But I never just wanted to be a screenwriter, except, if you have to have a day job, screenwriting is a cool one if you can get it. But I never was just like, I want to just be a screenwriter. I always I wanted to be a filmmaker. I wanted to be a novelist. I wanted to be a playwright. I wanted to be all these things. And I put them all aside to work on the damn screenplays because they were the ones that paid the bills. So once they stopped paying the bills, I wasn't really enthused to write another script because, once again, scripts are frustrating. If I write a novel and no one wants to publish it or whatever, I can just publish it myself. If I write a script, that doesn't mean I can make the film. Making a film is very, very difficult, very, very expensive. If you learn how to DIY it, you can do it. But I have other art forms I wanted to learn to do, so I stopped screenwriting. And that is the quick story. Okay, now there have been a billion comments and questions, so I'm just going to get into them. First, talking to Miller Turner, who said, "Kill Bill, I don't understand what the film is trying to say." I don't remember it that well. I've seen it twice. But my main feeling is it's a revenge story. It's the only thing I can say about it is I don't believe Tarantino was heading towards any deep, deep insight. I believe he was saying, isn't this cool? I believe that there's probably a certain amount of revenge is satisfying, revenge is never going to work kind of thing. Just some standard cliches. But when it says to what is a film trying to say? I don't know that I would go to a Tarantino film for what it's trying to say. It's just not his strong suit. His strong suit is being dazzling with the techniques and the genre flourishes to say basic genre cliches. I mean, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was kind of interesting because it said these old left behind old white guy Hollywood stars can clean up the world. I don't know. Are there any big messages in a Tarantino film? I don't think that's what we go to Tarantino for. That's all I can say. Okay, once again, what do you think about David Bordwell? I'm going to do a quick scan, see if anyone explained who Daniel Bordwell is. Robert? Daniel Bordwell. Okay, does anyone know who Daniel Bordwell is? All right. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to... Sanchez Pablo, let me know who Daniel Bordwell is. Okay. Hi, Sham Major S. M. Hi. Robert Freeman says, why is His Girl Friday so influential? Saw the film pop up on the Criterion channel and watched it. After I Googled it, it seems like a lot of directors praising it, but the film seems bizarre. Okay, His Gal Friday. The answer is that His Gal Friday, at the time, remember this is a very old film, at the time, it was influential for two main reasons. The first one was the relative strength and equality of the female character in a romantic comedy. It's a workplace comedy. It's actually an adaptation of an old classic comedy play called The Front Page. And what Hawks did was he said, what if we, instead of these two guys who have this sort of twisted, competitive relationship as reporters, what if one of them was a woman and the other was a man and they were a couple? And so it took rom-coms and it put them into the workplace, which was really new at the time. And also she is a tough guy. Like she's a fast talking, smart, tough guy reporter. And that was remarkable. And then technically the other thing that Hawks did that people talk about a lot with His Gal Friday was the pace. His Gal Friday was fast. They used to do films where they were very careful with the dialogue in that no one ever, what they call, overlapped. In other words, while one person is talking, the other people stay quiet, and then when they are done, they start talking. But there's always a very distinct stopping and starting of dialogue. You listen to the other person, and then you talk. They don't go over each other because you can't edit that. The whole point of it was that if you're editing and people are talking over each other, you can't cut. But if you have breaks between the lines, you can decide which take of which line to use, and you can cut them together. But that also makes for a very stagey, slow, unrealistic kind of talking. What Hawks did in his Gal Friday was he said, go as fast as you possibly can. People were talking all over the place. Boom, 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 boom. And it's fun. It's exciting. It's like razzmatazz. So anyway, the point is all of those things were then influential on many, many other films. It's still, this is like saying, why is the Model T considered an important car? It's a creaky old tiny little metal flapjack. It doesn't matter. It was important at the time. It's no longer impressive in that everything it did, it was 100 years ago. It was amazing that they got it done. So the answer is, it was important for its rethinking of the relationships of men and women, especially the idea of romance and work. And it was paced incredibly fast for an old movie. Okay. Trivikram says, how do you balance complexity and brevity in screenwriting for shorter attention spans without sacrificing depth or resorting to gimmicks? That's a good question. Here's my basic take on that. The thing about complexity is that complexity is not about density. In other words, you can have things be complex and simple. Complexity is the combination of simple things. Complexity is saying there is more than one element to this. However, that does not mean hard to follow. It does not mean long. You can have a complex short. You can have, to me, complexity is the layering of ideas so that you're not simply saying one thing. You're saying, this is true, but this is also true. That is what complexity is. And it often leads to ambiguity, and it often leads to things not being an easy answer. So those are hard to sell, but there's nothing inherently, well, that's not true. If you're going to worry about the audience's attention span, you're fine. If you're going to worry about the audience's desire to have things be simple, bold answers that take a side, then you're not going to get complexity because that's antithetical. But the other thing is when you say depth, sacrificing depth and complexity to me are actually two different things. To me, what people call depth is actually complexity. Is actually, in other words, to me, depth is if a character or a story or a line or something has more than one element to it, more than one thing going on. In other words, if a character is a thief and all they are is a thief, that's not very complex. It's not very deep. If they are a thief who is also suffering from an illness, or also is in love, or also is a patriot, or whatever it is, as soon as you get more than one thing going on in a character, in a scene, in anything, that is what we call depth or complexity. And you can do that incredibly fast and short if you need to. So the answer I would say is, if you don't think about complexity as number of elements, in other words, you need more than one, but it's not like 20 is more complex than 4. What's more complex is making the 4 meaningful and showing how they are true and balancing, showing the characters having to deal with being torn in two directions. But that doesn't mean you need 14 plots and 16 characters. Complexity, you can have complexity with the 3-character story, with 2-character story. So what I would say is, I think that you don't want to confuse number, scale, with actual depth. Depth has to do with not simplifying the ideas. Like, if it's a crime story, is it just, oh, we want to get away with the crime? Or is, the cost of this crime is this community is damaged? That makes a complexity, because you don't want the community damaged, but you do want the people to get away with their crime. That causes complexity. So that's my answer. J.W. Steed says His Gal Friday is one of the seminal rom-coms of all time. It's famously incredibly long script, so the actors had to speak at super speed to try and cram everything in. I don't know that it was an incredibly long script. I think it's an incredibly short movie considering the length of the script, but that's because of the speed. I don't think the speed was because it was long. They actually made it short in order to bring this. In other words, the speed was the goal. The speed was fun. The speed was a special effect. It was exciting. But I don't believe it was because it was a long script. In fact, I believe the script was pretty much cut down. It's much shorter than the original front page. Have you watched any new releases recently? Yes, I watched Begonia. I thought it was amazing. I loved Begonia. For those of you who are looking for a movie to see, Begonia knocked my socks off. It's also just a bloody fun film, well acted and still hilarious. Well, it's still hilarious to people who like 1930s films. If you are no longer speaking the language of the 1930s, it's not necessarily hilarious. Okay, Kill Bill was a remake of The Bride Wore Black, for those of you who wanted to know. Kind of. It was vaguely inspired by The Bride Wore Black. It's a Truffaut film from 1968. Hi, I have a fairly stupid question. No, Allison. In spy movies, there are scenes and the protagonist sneaks into the antagonist's place to find evidence. How can we write it in a screenplay without being boring? Well, this is going to be sort of an easy answer. Don't make it boring. What do you find boring about those scenes? Don't do that. For instance, think about what would you think is interesting about it. In Mission Impossible, what they made interesting about it was that he had to hang from the ceiling. In Mission Impossible 1, he sneaks in, he has to hang into the ceiling, and he can't get the temperature up, and he can't make any noise. That's an elaborate physical way. But it could also be that he has to sneak in by pretending to work there, or pretending to be a paramedic, or whatever it is. I don't know. You have to decide what it is that you think is interesting, and hopefully something that matches into the story's larger style. Like in Mission Impossible, it was all high tech, stunt related. Whereas in some of these scenes, it's all about character interplay, or I don't know. It would depend. But the answer to your question is, it's not a stupid question. It's just that you know the answer, which is, what do you find not boring? Why do you think they're boring? I find many of those interesting. So I guess what I would say is the way that you write anything without being boring is identify what you think is boring about the versions you've seen, and do the thing that you think won't be boring. It's just that there's no boredom meter. There's no electrical device you can attach to things and say, is this boring? Oh yeah, it's a 7 on the boring meter. No, because different people find different things boring. Some people can sit and watch a character interplay between people and be riveted. And other people would say, no, I need somebody hanging from the ceiling on wires. You have to decide what's boring to you. Hello, Lake Filter. How do you create empathy for an anti-hero protagonist? I've talked about this a bunch of times. I urge you to watch these videos, the one on character especially. But the main thing I would say is the way that you create empathy for any character is you give them something that they want, and you make us understand why it's important to them. In other words, if your anti-hero is refusing to pay child support. And this is not going to be great, but you know what? In the 1960s, this was a typical character who said, I value my independence and freedom more than my responsibility to my family. And so these people were constantly leaving relationships and going off on their own and having life adventures. So what you would need to do to make your anti-hero empathetic is to show the repressive nature of the thing they are defying. In other words, you have to think about what is it about them that you feel deserves empathy. The answer to your questions almost always, folks, is what do you think the answer is? In other words, if your anti-hero is, let's say in Breaking Bad, he's a guy who's arrogant and frustrated and he's got a lot of other problems, but his goal initially is to provide for his family after his inevitable death from cancer. That's empathetic. But then the real empathy is, can he win? Truly. What the thing is, remember, you can feel empathy for someone who is doing a bad thing because we kind of often admire or give vicarious thrills to bad things. Somebody who wants power, Macbeth. These are people who are doing bad things, but we can care about them because when you start a story, you invest in what that person's values are. One other way that I would suggest look at this video, 6 Essential Questions, because that really talks about it. As far as I can tell, you can create empathy for anyone. I mean, you're not going to create empathy for someone who has a strong moral or personal disinclination to like that thing. In other words, if you say, it's worth it, you have to be a criminal because the system is rigged and therefore screw them all, I'm taking what I need. Well, that's fine unless the person in the audience has been a victim of the crime. They are not going to find that admirable. Nothing you can do can fix that. So what I would say is you need to define for yourself what quality in them is something that you feel the audience should feel, even if it's a bittersweet or doomed empathy. We admire their ambition. We admire their determination to get free of and discover new things. These are all things that have terrible costs for them and other people, but we can still have empathy for that. Or they're hurt, they're wounded, they want to burn the world down because they've been hurt. Cool, we can have empathy for that, even though we don't really want them to burn down the world. Okay. Jeff says, after last week's box office massacre, I wonder what the script biz will look like going forward. I suspect everything we know about screenwriting is wildly in flux right now. I think that's been true for the past 10 years. This particular box office massacre, I honestly don't feel is very important. We're already committed to giving up on theatrical, and the business itself is like every business in the world right now is trying to find ways not to pay people. So that's what they're going to do. All right. Violet Wolf says, I don't respect what Woody Allen did, but I love his work. Yes. It's tricky. It is indeed tricky. In fact, I am reading a book and I'm not that far into it, you can see, but it's called Monsters by Claire Dederer, which is about wrestling with the issue. And I can't recommend it. I don't know where it's going, but I can tell you that the first 50 pages or so are very readable and thought-provoking and pretty good. But anyway, yeah. What do we do when a reprehensible person creates art that we like? And the truth is, almost always, people who create things that we like are probably not people we like. All I can say is you have to decide personally whether or not you feel it taints your experience of it so much you don't want to experience it anymore, or that you don't want to support them if they are living. If they're dead, I don't know that it matters if you buy their book, but currently, if you buy a ticket to a movie from Woody Allen or Roman Polanski, you are actually supporting them. So that is a tricky issue. Woody's new novel, What About Bob, is wonderful. A perfect literary manifestation of what he does best. Cool. I was probably the world's biggest Woody Allen fan in the 1980s. But I sort of moved on because he didn't move on. He grew within his small patch, but truthfully, he feels old now, which I wouldn't mind if he wasn't. I genuinely, I feel like there's a lot of other older artists who have become more interesting as they've gone along. Scorsese and Coppola both have continued to grow, and Woody Allen kind of is in a groove, and he does great variations within the groove, and some of his movies are truly beautiful to me. But yeah, I don't know. Thank you, Helene. I'm so glad. Thank you. When Back to the Future reissue is on top of the top of the box office chart, you know cinemas are in trouble. Yes, cinemas are in trouble. Yes, the world is changing. Deal with it. The fact is, the 20th century's motion picture screen entertainment world is gone. It's gone. There are leftover manifestations of it, but they are rapidly being replaced. So all I can say is you can mourn it. You can talk about how it was better. But if you want to continue to be creative, either you're going to have to, this is like opera. If you love opera, you are going to have to learn how to do opera when it is not the center of the culture anymore. Okay. Which is fine. Do that. But just do recognize that the moment in which theatrical motion pictures produced by studios are the center of the screen entertainment world, that's just gone. That's just no longer true. Okay. Is this a nepo baby industry nowadays, and the quality of film and TV is suffering as a result? Film festivals advertise exciting up-and-coming filmmaker is just the child of a big filmmaker. Here's the problem. Film has now been around for 125 years, which means that people, the number of people working in film is larger, the pile is bigger. And each of them, when you grow up in an industry, you are very naturally going to, first of all, have a way in. In other words, you can call a producer and say, hey, would you like to look at my script? And they will look at it. And you have a head start in understanding how things work. You've probably been on sets. That's actually a big deal. So the answer is, truthfully, we've had nepo babies since Lon Chaney in Silent Era and Lon Chaney Jr. I mean, there's just, John Huston was Walter Huston's son. His kids are Angelica and Danny, and I believe Jack. I can't remember if Jack is a son or a grandson. But the point is, the Huston family is a 3 generation, and I think there might even be more of them now. The Bridges family. There's tons of families, tons of what we call nepo babies. It's simply what happens when you grow up in Hollywood. So I don't feel like the question then is just, are they getting an advantage that they don't deserve? Or, first of all, they're the children of talented people. They may have talent. And B, they have more access. They have an interest. They're probably working in it. They may be good. Like, I don't want to say, let's cut out nepo babies and get rid of Jeff Bridges. Jeff Bridges deserves his career. Okay. Jack Quaid is doing great. He's doing great. There's tons of people who are absolutely terrific. And I don't think that we should say you're ruled out of doing something simply because your parents did it. That just doesn't seem right to me. So my answer is, the only issue with Nepo babies is if they don't do good work and they get slots that other people would have gotten. To a certain extent, that will happen. That also happens in law firms and everything else. So I don't know. I'm not really, I don't think Nepo babies is the big problem in our industry right now. Funny how BFI and Sight and Sound magazines report that UK cinema attendance is back to pre-pandemic level. Interesting. That's cool. Yeah, no, I personally believe that going to theaters and watching stuff is going to continue. I don't think it will be the central experience for most people that it was in 1948. Hong Kong classic film noir PTU got to be the best when the detectives search for the missing gun for the boss. Okay, so so you're talking about reasons where people sneak into places and try to find things in suspense movies. Yeah, absolutely. There are certainly good ones. Hi, Nishaj. Glad that you're here. Okay. Junior Henry Kane says there is a huge scandal in China. Recording of Wong Kar Wai's own voice was leaked, revealing his films are not improv, but he actually paid an intern to write scripts with underpaid wages, then not credits them. How should this scandal affect his legacy? Because should we not appreciate his films because he was exploiting interns? Once again, this is a tricky question. First of all, always check if a recording is released, whether or not it is actually a recording or whether it is AI, because that now is a thing that can happen. But assuming that if Wong Kar Wai says, yes, I said that, I admit I said it, then the question is, there's a couple of different issues. One is improv or not improv. I don't know that that's a big scandal. The question is, frankly, if he's saying like, I had this intern come up with a story and lines, or I had this actor come up with the story and lines, what's the difference? I mean, honestly, he's saying, I went to people who brought their creativity and I used it. That's cool. Not paying them is tricky. And not crediting them, although credit has been a very, very complex issue for the entire history of the industry. And the answer is very often people do not get credited. The Writers Guild, God bless them, has recently changed its rules so that anyone who works on a script gets a credit. They don't get the credit, they get a special also worked on credit. And that means they don't get part of the money that comes in from having the credit. But that's okay. Like, I worked on many films where I didn't get credit. I kind of wish that I had. For one thing, it's nice to have your IMDb page show all the work you did. I had 20 scripts that I wrote for various companies, and I didn't get credit for them, but I helped that project along. So the answer is, should we condemn Wong Kar Wai for how he treats interns? I'm not thrilled about him not paying his interns, but I don't know. I would say the first thing you do is you try and see if they'll change, and the second is you have to decide how bad the crime was to the people who are. I don't know how bad exploiting interns script writing is compared to like sexual harassment or, discrimination, refusing to let people work. Those are my personal boundaries. Hi, John Lovell Jr. Was the Christian religion good for women in the old days, and is it still good for them? Well, I don't know. I would say this is, first of all, not really a screenwriting question, and so I am certainly not an authority on the Christian religion. I am personally not Christian, although I have read a fair amount about it. Overall, I would personally say it was not good. It made them secondary citizens. There are some people who would say that that was good because they were in the proper hierarchy of things. I don't like that. I don't believe in that. I believe that it was not good for them. I hope that it will become increasingly good for them. but this is way outside my pay grade. I do not know. First of all, good or bad, I think we can safely say that the Christian religion was not particularly open to women's contributions in, quote, the old days. So if that was a serious question, I think my personal answer, and it's a personal opinion, is the Christian religion could have been better to women. All right. Sorry. I got a thumbs down on that. I don't know if that's from John Lovell or for what, but I'm taking a break from writing today, Lake Filter says. Just finishing the analysis for a novel, which I'll use for proper editing. I love myself as a reviewer, but I dread actually doing what the notes told me to. You know, I feel you. I don't love myself as a reviewer, but I think that you do have to sometimes step away and say, okay, I'm not going to be the writer right now. I'm going to be the critic. But good, Lake. That's great. Bruno Fernandez says, did you watch the new Francis Ford Coppola film Dancing on the Moon, in the Moon? He said he did a test screening at UCLA Extension. You teach there, right? No, I taught there 12 years ago. I have not taught there recently. How cool that he did that. That's lovely. I have not seen it. Thank you for asking. I'm curious. Coppola, Scorsese, all of these people, they do a lot of work. Some of it's going to work better than others. Sometimes their failures are interesting for creative people in that you can see someone try something that isn't safe, and it may fail, but that's interesting. That's inspiring. Sometimes you say, okay, how can I take what he was trying to do and do it in a way that I think will work? So that's what all I can say is when Coppola makes movies, I haven't seen all of them, honestly. There's just so many. But all of them that I've seen, I've never thought that was a complete waste of time. Sometimes I've thought like, well, that was a complete mess, but always an interesting mess, and always certain parts of it are like, ooh, that's cool. And I don't know that cool thing would exist in something that was less messy. So thank you. Steed says, my path was very interesting and I appreciate you sharing, and you are welcome. Do you have any tips on writing character descriptions? Not only do I have tips, I already did a whole live stream in which I talked about them. I will put a link in the description about 10 minutes after we're done here, which would be pretty soon. You probably should stop asking questions because I'm not going to get to answer more of them. Character descriptions. I actually did a whole thing where I took some character descriptions and I put them up on the screen. So I'm going to put a link in the description about 10 minutes after we're done here. You can go to that live stream and watch that. Lake Filter wishes he could edit without making notes first, but the notes help making callbacks, which I use, pretend that I know my novel front to back while not remembering what happens 3 paragraphs ago. Yes. It's lovely to think we know what we're doing. My experience is with everything I have done, but especially now working on a novel, you don't really know until you write it. And when you write it, you start to grope around within that new knowledge. And it often goes in places you don't expect. And that's okay. That's part of the process. The process is not like architecture where you perfectly plan down to which hinges go on which door, and then you do that, and then it's done and it stands there. That's not how creative writing works. You make a plan, and then you build it, and then you look at all the places that things don't fit, or things are like you find they have one room with 5 doors. You're like, I don't need all those doors. So you have to go back and take out some of the doors and maybe put them in other rooms. And as much as you think, oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, you find that you put in 5 doors, even though you know that a room shouldn't have 5 doors. At the moment, you thought, oh, this needs that extra door. All I know is that that's what's happening to me. I'm looking at my novel right now. I spent years outlining every scene. I wrote a rough draft. I looked at it, and I'm like, oh my God, these 2 scenes, they make a loop. The character's just doing the same thing twice. I have to take one of them and move it into the other. I was sure that that structure was right. Okay. Tarantino is a big fan of old kung fu movies, among other things, exploitation movies in general. So Kill Bill was a nod to one of those movies. Absolutely. It's a nod to many things. Kill Bill is like any Tarantino movie, but especially Kill Bill, is a pile of references and delighting in playing with those tropes. I think Jackie Brown is the most substantial Tarantino film. That's interesting. I have very mixed feelings about Jackie Brown. But it could be the most substantial. I don't know. That's a tricky one. If you aren't good at writing dialogue that sounds like anyone yourself, what is the best way to get better? Hi, Susan Sheldon. I have talked about this in a couple of live streams. I do urge you to look at my videos on this topic because I did a whole one called Dialogue. And then there's actually another one about on the nose dialogue. And I think there's even one. No, there isn't one on subtext. That's so weird. There should be. Anyway, the point is the first thing I would say about writing dialogue that sounds like anyone but yourself, maybe that's how you are. Maybe that, that can be okay. Patty Chayefsky, Aaron Sorkin, all sorts of writers, essentially everybody sounds like a Noel Coward. Everybody sounds like them. That's okay. That's just the style. But if you don't want to do that, what I would say is please do look at my video on dialogue and also on character, because there's a lot of that there. But the main answer is try to technically say, okay, in order to break up my speakers, the first thing is think about what is their attitude. Are they snarky? Are they angry? Are they shy? And make sure they have distinctly different ones. In other words, if a character is a sidekick to the main character, and they are kind of undercutting the hero all the time, then their dialogue should sound different than somebody who's sucking up to the hero all the time or begging the hero for a chance to be a hero themselves. Those are all going to change the way they talk. But then mechanically think, I'm going to take this character and I'm going to say they only get to speak in short sentences. They only get to use, they always talk about you, not I. They never say, I want this. They say, you ought to give me this. Things like that. There's mechanical things you can do. And then the other thing I would do is really, really listen to dialogue that you think is good. Type it out. Take dialogue and hit pause after every line and type out a few pages that you think is really good dialogue and try to see what's the difference. The difference is not usually vocabulary or something like that. It's a little bit that, but mainly it's the intention of the character. In other words, the way that somebody talks. In The Godfather, Tom Hagen goes to see Waltz, the head of the studio. Waltz talks in long, flowing paragraphs. He's very bossy. He's very, I'm going to take space. And Tom Hagen is very, very careful. It's not that their words are particularly different, although Tom is a little more formal. But the main thing is the attitude, the way that they are trying to change or affect the other person is going to create a difference in their dialogue. David Bordwell is a film critic my screenwriting professor keeps referencing. My answer is, what do you think of David Bordwell? I do not know, so I unfortunately cannot say. His Gal Friday is 196 pages long. It had to be that fast. Really? I am fascinated by that. I will look into that. Wow. 196 pages? What that says is that what they were doing was that they were planning the overlaps, planning that people were going to be talking on top of each other. Fascinating. I will definitely look into that. Thank you, Steve. That's interesting. Am I excited that Tom Cruise confirmed Top Gun 3 is in the works? It's fine. I'll see it. I have never been a fan of any of the Top Guns. I think Top Gun 2 Maverick was It was fine. I hate Tom. I hate Top Gun. I love Tom Cruise. I hate Top Gun. I think the original Top Gun is an awful movie. Really, there's very little about Top Gun. I mean, I understand why people have an affection for it, but to me, that's just a really poor piece of cinema there. Complexity is fine as long as you make sure it's not confusing. That is true. There's an early question about how do you keep things short and moving along when you want complexity. And the answer is complexity and confusion are very, very different. Complexity is understanding a situation in which there is not one easy answer. Confusion is, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what they're thinking. Okay. No more questions, please. I want to write 3 different timelines, and in each timeline, the protagonist has different hair to show the mood, like Eternal Sunshine. How can I integrate that into the script? You say it. You say, you differentiate your timelines. You say, this one's 1968, this one's 1975, and this one's 1984. So you always identify in the subline, like Billy's house, day 1983. And then the first time you use that time, you say, in 1983, Susan had blue hair. So whenever we see her in 1983, her hair is dyed blue. And then in 1985, you say, Susan had white hair, whatever. So the way you write it is you say it. I read the timeline on the remake of Planet of the Apes. It went from development to the shelf and back for 20 years. My feeling is you never know. Yes. Yes. Almost every movie is a complex series of people. What's happening is the script is only one element of why a movie gets made. And so a script can be really good, but you need to organize the stars, the director, the producers, the financing, and each one of them will have a different thing they want. And so the script becomes kind of a football that gets kicked around between all these forces who have different things they want out of the project. The script keeps changing all the way through. Very usually, the script is replaced by another script by a different writer. Sometimes they then go back to the original script. Sometimes they don't. But the answer is a movie is not a script. A movie is a production involving many, many elements, many of which have nothing to do with the script, and so scripts get beat up. I want to write a new script, but my idea seems not to match any genre mentioned in Save the Cat. So screw Save the Cat. Throw Save the Cat across the room. Don't use it. If you have a script and you have an idea that you want and it's not in Save the Cat, you have a choice. You can live in Save the Cat or you can be you. I would advise being you. I would say Save the Cat is not good advice. Save the Cat is a book full of weird advice, which honestly, most of it is bad advice. I don't know what to tell you. The definitions of genres in Save the Cat are among the most ludicrous parts of that book. They are not genres. They are weird categories that only that author thought of. I don't know. Speaking about Mission Impossible, I don't get the hate of Mission Impossible 2. I was watching it in the cinema and I felt it was great. Do you mean part 2 of the last one? Or do you mean Mission Impossible 2? But I'm guessing that you mean the part 2 of the final reckoning. And the answer is, I agree. I thought it was terrific. Does it have long, talky sections? Yes. I thought that was fun. I thought the talk in the long, talky sections was entertaining. However, some people didn't like it. I don't get why people didn't like it, but Okay. Watson Neal says, I have no empathy towards the characters in Begonia. Why would you think it's great? Jesse Plemons' character is clearly an idiot. Well, first of all, that's your opinion, and I respect that your opinion. I don't think he's an idiot. I think he is a person who was badly damaged by a series of events in his life. He's probably not the smartest guy ever, but he's pretty smart. And without doing any spoilers, I would say, Jesse Plemons' character turns out to be very smart indeed in some ways. But the main thing is he's damaged. He's hurt. He has had his life steamrolled by a bunch of events, and he is hurt. He's injured. He's barely able to survive because of all the unfair things that have happened to him. So that's, my answer is, do I have empathy for him? Yes, I have empathy for all of those characters. That's what I think is great about it. So there you go. What kind of changes do you think Hollywood studios should make to improve the quality of their films? They should spend less per film and make more films and make them in more different genres. And then the quality would go up. Okay. Speaking of Woody Allen, there was a movie podcast and the host said he had never heard of Annie Hall. Was Woody Allen on that podcast? Okay. Anyway, yeah, no, it's possible. Listen, we are getting to the point where 25 years into the 21st century, there are many people who are born never having been in the 20th century. And anything that happened in the 20th century is going to feel distant and inaccessible. And also things that were bold and brave and outrageous, 50 years ago are now standard because they broke that ground. So they broke that ground. And from then on, you could have a hero who didn't obey society. You could have a woman who was tough in her job. You could have an ending where the story fails. There's all sorts of things you could have because people were daring then. But once they did that, it opened up the landscape to allow for that. And since then, lots of people have done it. And there you go. So the answer is, should people who are in the film business know film history? I would like to think so, but you can go without it. You can just be skimming on the surface right at the present. You'll make some interesting stuff. I feel like it's incumbent on anyone who is working in any art form to know everything that they can about that art form, just if nothing else, to have raw material to use, to steal from. Anyway, empathy is actually easy. Give the protagonist a problem. Empathy is then automatic, courtesy of James Scott Bell. And that can dovetail with the object of desire. Yeah, that is true. I think that's one way of phrasing it. I always phrase it as give them something they want. In other words, if you are trying to create empathy for a character, if you give them something they want, I don't know why, but we tend to feel empathy for them. Even if what they want is bad, we still somehow care. But you could think of that as a problem because when somebody has a problem, they want to do something to solve that problem. So that's another way to look at it. Entertainment industry has always been a nepo industry. Lucille Ball got Desi and her kids into the industry. Jane Fonda is in her 80s and her father was Henry. Yeah. Yes. No, that's absolutely true. No, it goes way back before. It goes back to the silent days. Absolutely. Woody Allen is back because his new movie just got greenlit by the Spanish government with the condition that the title must include the word Madrid. It's bizarre to have state fund a Woody Allen film. Yeah, no, Woody's always been more popular in Europe. And, everybody finds their sources of support. What do you think the big problem in our industry is right now? The same big problem of everything, which is that there's large companies whose only goal is making increased profits for shareholders. That is the problem, because at least some portion of a business needs to have the goal of doing a good job doing the thing that business does. And increasingly, in the past 50 years, the psychology of shareholders being more important, in other words, the people who invest in the company having the topmost need, and therefore, if you can get a worse product or pay your people worse or cheat the customers, and that will give you more profit, that's considered the right choice. Obviously, that is bad. And that is what is happening to a certain extent in the entertainment industry. There are still, of course, groups of people and certain individuals who are saying, I want to do a good movie. But very many of the companies are saying, hey, we can do better by doing mediocre movies and having them just churn out real fast. That's the problem. In my opinion, shareholder capitalism is the biggest problem. The biggest problem is, and everything else comes from that, centralization. The idea that you need to have your company be so big that it wipes all the other companies off the map. That's bad. That's bad for the art form. It may be good for your company, but you are strangling the art form in order to make your company stronger and more impressive. That just bites. That's bad. Okay. All right. Okay, no more questions. Not a one. Funny that a web series script I wrote some years ago is having a second look from a showrunner. Funny thing is, I'm not sure the currently written premise reflects what the story is about. Keep working. J. Henry Kane about Wong Kar Wai. The report didn't say he didn't pay the intern. He hired the intern instead of proper screenwriters, so he can pay a much lower wage. He had them write scripts instead of the office runner in the job ads. Okay, so basically, here's the tricky thing about this. Ideally, he would pay. This is interesting because, like in America, if someone writes for a script, they must be in the union. So therefore, they would have to be paid at least the minimum of a union writer. So all I can say is we should have unions that protect the workers from abuse. On the other hand, I can understand Wong Kar Wai saying, hey, let's get all the different voices. Let's get the caterers and let's get the office runners and have them all contribute stuff to the scripts because that'll bring in all sorts of life and vitality. That's cool, but then they should be paid and credited. Okay, giving you a thumbs up to balance the thumbs down for the third Christian question. We do the best we can. I probably shouldn't have answered it all, but thank you. Appreciate that, Jay Steed. LZ Skydog says, when directing a film, what do you emphasize most to approach the creative process effectively, both in preparation and on the set? That is way too big a question. That is a life's work to understand that. I would say that among the things that you need to do is A, you need to have a script that works and you need to understand how it works. But the thing about being a director is you need to understand how a script works, how actors work, how the camera works, how the production design works. You need to understand at very least what those things do. You may not need to know every lens aperture, but you need to know that different lens looks have different effects. You need to know that different actors need different kinds of support. The thing I would emphasize to approach the creative process most effectively is know your job, know all the stuff that goes into it, and do it repeatedly. That's the best thing I could do with such a general question is to be a good director, you really, really, really need to understand what directing is. And directing encompasses all of these collaborations where you don't actually do anything. What you're doing as a director is getting the other people to coordinate their work towards a vision that you are steering their work. That's the main thing I would say is it's really important to recognize that everyone who's collaborating, who's working on a film is bringing something. And what's really important for the director is to think, my job is to balance that flow of all this stuff, because what happens is those different elements, they get in the way of each other. Like the actor may feel restricted by the exact words, but the script wants the exact words the way they are. The lighting people really, really want to put lights on one side of the thing, but that means that the sound people can't use the boom over there. So there's constant balancing of the different elements of this incredibly complicated procedure. And the first thing about directing a film is you need to know that. And as far as I can tell, the only way to know that is to do it a bunch at low stakes. Okay. Why would Coppola do a screen test in UCLA Extension? No, it's not. He went to UCLA. So he chose UCLA because he likes to support UCLA and because he likes to get voices from young students. And so why not go to the school he actually went to? It makes perfect sense. Okay, can you explain why writers don't get credit for scripts they have written? I don't understand that part of the business. I don't have knowledge of it, or do you have a video about that? I think I do have a video about it, but I'm going to just tell you very briefly. Here's the deal. Credit in Hollywood films, in American films, is for screenwriting is awarded by the Screenwriters Union, the Writers Guild of America. In other words, in setting up the union, one of the things that the union was trying to do was stop producers from A, stealing credit, and B, awarding credit unfairly. In other words, they'd say, hey, my brother-in-law needs a job. I'm going to make him the writer. I'm going to give him the credit. And they would do that. So therefore, in order to take that power away from the studio, the union made part of forming the union, part of the union law, that credit was arbitrated by the union. For a long time, the union rule was that only one or two writers should have credit. However, the truth is, very often, 8 writers worked on a project. And so what the union did was they said, we don't want to have 8 writers' names on a script because it makes it look bad. It makes it look like the script is a mess. It makes it look like the writers aren't very important. Now, in truth, that's the way screenwriting works, and they should have let it. But they didn't. What they said is, we want to create the idea of authorship, that there is a person who writes the script. So almost always they take one name, whoever wrote the largest percentage of the script, and they say they get the credit. Now, that was how it was done for many, many years, from the 1930s up till very recently. And they got several layers of arbitration in which they said, if you wrote the original script, you must have some credit. Very often it was called story by, because you wrote the original script and then they rewrote it so much it's unrecognizable, so you got a story by credit. But many, many people work on films, and very often their credits are taken away because the next writer rewrites the script drastically. So their work, while it may have served a purpose and there may be pieces of it there, they got wiped out of credit. Very recently, 2 or 3 years ago, the union finally admitted, they finally said, you know what, we should give all those writers credit. But the problem was credit was tied to residuals. Residuals is the money you get when the movie was released. In other words, if the movie makes X amount of dollars, the writer is given 0.1% of that X. Now, the way that was decided was who had credit was the writer who got that 0.1%. So getting credit was a big deal. So they said, we can't divide that up among 8 writers. So what they did was they said, we're going to give credit and the money to the main writer. But the other writers will get listed in the end credits as additional writing material or whatever. No money attached, but at least you get the credit of saying, hey, I worked on that movie. I came up with that idea that was used later and they changed the dialogue. Like Fracture, which I wrote. There was a guy who wrote the original script, Dan Pine. Much of his script is gone, but some of it's still there, and the basic premise was his. There was 4 other writers who worked on it who didn't get credit because I did, because I rewrote their material. And admittedly, most of their material is not in the script. But if it wasn't there, I wouldn't have been able to write my script, so they should have had credit. Anyway, that's the answer. And this is only in America. I do not know how it works in other countries. Okay, it's nighttime over here in Norway, heading to bed to read your book. Thank you, Krawea. Thank you. You're live in my screenwriting class. Bill! Oh my gosh. Bill. Okay. Oh, that is hysterical. Bill Pace is a screenwriting teacher in New Jersey, and he's a wonderful screenwriting teacher. He also wrote a really cool book, William Pace. It's called it's a long title, but it's basically how to make films within limits. In other words, when you're working on a low budget film or something, and it's a really cool film, book about that topic. It's from William Pace. Anyway, he was doing the thing. I have to talk to him. Okay, take care, everybody. It's been great to see you. I gotta go. This has been delightful.